Story 1. Since he is applying the tariffs so universally, countries are likely to band together and try to cut the United States out of their supply chain. This will have a long-lasting impact. Story 2. One thing is probably true. The distrust for America after this round of events may not dissipate for a generation. There is always the possibility of another leader like Trump around the corner. Story 3. My issue right now is the subtle global boycott against American products. Essentially, if given the choice to purchase non-American goods, people are choosing not to buy American. I know individuals whose international sales have declined by over 90%, so the tariffs are not as significant as the reality that no one is buying anything anymore. I expect this situation to worsen. Story 4. Economies were not as intertwined going into the 1930s as they are now. This situation will be significantly worse. Story 5. I'm not an economist, but I know tariffs are passed on to the middle and lower classes. So buckle up and pay attention to the stock market for the stores you shop at. If their stock drops, that can determine the corporation's next move. Story 6. It is concerning. Trust in the United States has diminished. Many are focused on making agreements with other nations. I am worried about potential aggressive actions, such as invading a neighboring country. Personally, I am frustrated with the current administration's interference in international affairs. I also find the obsession with wealth among billionaires unsettling. This constant negativity is influencing my decisions, making me reluctant to support American products or visit the country. The United States has become an unreliable ally. Story 7. It would be bad enough without the rest of the destruction he caused to our government and support structures. Now people will be jobless with high inflation and no support. Great Depression 2 soup lines with no soup. Just starving people. Story 8. It will be worse. There will be instability, which means that even the benefits you are supposed to receive, such as increased industrial investment in the United States, may not occur because no one knows how long the tariffs will last. Story 9. It will take decades to recover if the tariffs are lifted one day, but it will probably never return to the level it was at prior. The damage is significant, and the decisions are unhinged. Relationships with allies are severely affected. People in the United States will suffer greatly. There will be no real incentive to increase domestic production unless a new, even lower class is established, which would represent a major reduction in the overall standard of living. A shift toward this requires significant cuts to education and leaves many people trapped. All I hope for is that the upcoming desperation-driven extremism does not lead to a lot of bloodshed. I see no winners in the equation. Story 10. People who are acting as if there is a grand plan behind this are mistaken. Trump is simply incompetent. This entire administration lacks competence. Occam's razor. Story 11. Someone explain to me why one person has so much power. We saw this with Mitch McConnell blocking any legislation coming to the Senate for even debate. We saw him stop the appointment of a Supreme Court justice and the conviction of Donald Trump, who was obviously guilty. If we survive the next few years as a country, we can no longer depend upon the honor of people elected to power. Safeguards need to be implemented to prevent this. What good does it do to elect people who have power only as designated by the senior members, where everyone is expected to fall in line? Story 12. The biggest fear is that we have already experienced Trump's brinkmanship before. The first time it was frightening due to the uncertainty. However, everyone now understands how he operates. Instead of appeasing someone who constantly cries wolf, they will choose to avoid the situation altogether. You will start to see the United States not being invited to trade partnerships. These countries know it will be challenging, but if they cannot rely on U.S. stability, they will find alternatives. This disunity is going to lead to disaster. The power vacuum will cause conflict, and I hope the disillusioned youth who voted for this chaos is ready to face the consequences. Story 13. Trump is trying to solve a problem that exists only in his mind using numbers he made up. Of course, this will harm us all significantly. Story 14. They are a significant mistake, but allowing him to buy an election was also a major error. 23% of voters have put a dictator with no political experience in charge for the second time. He will harm the economy just like he did the first time. Story 15. I swear, being a historian is like becoming Cassandra. No one listens to you, and then we all suffer the consequences. Story 16. One major difference between now and the Great Depression is the presence of credit cards. In the past, when people couldn't find work, they simply went without. Today, many people manage to get by using debt. However, once credit limits are reached and savings are depleted, the consequences could be even more devastating. Story 17. Smoot-Hawley prolonged the depression while attempting to solve it. Trump caused a depression while trying to address a non-existent problem. Trump's actions are worse. Story 18. He is creating a financial disaster by allowing emergency powers to be enacted. While reasonable countries exclude the United States from trade, he will align us with Russia and North Korea, forming a new axis of evil featuring despotic dictators. Story 19. That's funny. I watch a cocktail channel on YouTube called How to Drink, and the host recently did 2 videos, the favorite drinks of the 10 best presidents as named by Siena College and the 10 worst presidents. The latter video came out yesterday. He discussed how much Herbert Hoover struggled as a president and the Smoot-Hawley Act, which he described as the second worst tariffs. As he was talking, text appeared on the screen that said, "Hold my Diet Coke. I was dying." Story 20. We have known for 90 years that tariffs and currency mismanagement caused the Great Depression of the 1930s. It is foolish and irrational for Trump to impose tariffs as he has. This is basic economic understanding. If it is not self-deluded ignorance, it is a deliberate attempt to undermine Western economies. Story 21. Last time tariffs were implemented, Republicans did not hold the House or Senate for 60 years. It is important to consider history in all aspects. Story 22. Trump is likely going to mark the end of the United States as a global leader. This seems to be already over. Most of the United States allies do not trust the administration, and it has not even been 3 months. It is concerning. Story 23. It will be worse. He imposed all these tariffs without creating incentives to move the industries back to the United States. Instead, other countries will form a trade agreement that excludes the United States. Nearly all consumer electronics contain foreign parts. This not only harms consumers but also affects businesses. The cost of supporting business infrastructure and employees has just increased. Story 24. It's difficult to determine definitively what the impact would be. The new average tariff rate exceeds the Smoot-Hawley tariff rate. If we witness widespread retaliatory measures, it could have an even greater impact. Although the Smoot-Hawley tariff was enacted under worse economic conditions both domestically and internationally, Trump was fortunate to inherit a strong economy, which provides more room for decline. Story 25. Some countries will capitulate because they have no effective choice, but they will likely take more robust steps to protect their economies in the future. Previously, they might have relied on the stability of the United States as a trading partner. America will have less leverage over them in the future. Some countries will retaliate because they can, and because they know America's dependencies, short-term and long-term, do not match the rhetoric. Everyone will view America negatively and realize that they cannot rely on it, both in terms of business and as a reliable partner on the world stage. This has far-reaching consequences. It is remarkable that Trump and his supporters believe companies would commit billions to manufacturing efforts, which would take years to develop, given the unreliability of their environment. They could start a project only for tariffs to be removed the next day on a whim. This does not even account for the differences in labor costs, among other factors. Story 26. Who knows? Allowing a chatbot to calculate imaginary trade balance, correcting rates, and challenging the entire world at once could work. Let's take a chance with the entire American economy. Story 27. When Trump creates a depression, which is his intention, he can buy up America with his friends. It is a pathetic attempt to establish himself like the Rockefellers and Vanderbilts. Story 28. Yes, they will. I think the long-term goal is that corporations wanting to sell goods in the United States will need to have manufacturing in the United States or pay a large bribe, which will take decades. In the meantime, existing manufacturers will still sell products in the United States, but their prices will be higher. This has never hurt luxury brands like Porsche, BMW, and Rolls-Royce, as the expense is part of the appeal. Non-luxury goods, including food, will simply stop coming to the United States if they cannot compete with local products. In all cases, this makes things significantly more expensive for the American public, both in the short and long term. In summary, it is unwise and recessionary. Story 29. My Vanguard accounts are down 70% year to date. I am frustrated. I voted Republican in the past 5 elections, but I have now become a Democrat because of all the gains I have lost under the Trump tariffs. There are others like me. Story 30. This marks the end of United States leadership. Countries are unlikely to trust the United States again unless significant changes are made to the system to ensure stability. Story 31. It is absolutely ridiculous that someone near their deathbed can negatively impact our country for so long after they are gone. Story 32. History doesn't repeat, but sometimes it rhymes. Tariffs are taking place in a very different economic world. It will cause chaos, it will hurt people, it will reorient the world, but the outcome will not be predictable beyond that. However, people saying the United States is doomed are mistaken. The United States is, among many other things, 1. The largest economy in the world, the reserve currency, the most powerful military to ever exist by a large margin, the largest producer of oil, the 3rd largest producer of food. What is truly concerning about this whole situation is that there is likely very little the world can do to displace the United States as the dominant force globally. Imagine if Superman suddenly became a villain. They'll hate us, they won't listen to us, and over time our influence will diminish. But the hard power and resources we have still exist, and we can still cause significant harm in the meantime. At some point, the world will have to find a way to deal with the United States. We aren't going anywhere, but we are changing, and into what is the most terrifying question on my mind. Story 33. We pay the tariffs so Trump can use that money to give the 2% of $4.2 trillion tax break. The same individuals who received the $1.9 trillion in 2017, which is worth $456 million to Alice Walton, and increased the deficit year over year by 20%. Story 34. The issue is that the individual in question disclosed his intentions to everyone. Experts across the board, including members of the Republican Party, warned that this would have negative consequences. Unfortunately, a significant number of individuals expressed their approval. We live in a society facing challenges. Story 35. Even if the tariffs are reversed, there will be long-lasting impacts. The tariffs were implemented by executive order, not through Congress. Businesses will not shift manufacturing to the U.S. or permanently alter supply chains when tariffs can be implemented or reversed at any moment. Only when stability is established will businesses make lasting changes to operations. Story 36. I'm not saying that this is all positive, but the fallout will not be as severe. The Federal Reserve compounded the economic pain from the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act by failing to provide liquidity and stabilize the banking system. For more details, refer to Milton Friedman's and Anna Schwartz's Monetary History of the United States. The Federal Reserve has learned from the past and has demonstrated strong political independence, so I believe they will be able to provide more support in this situation. Story 37. It is not just the tariffs. It is all of the issues that have alienated the United States from countries like Canada and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, when we have always supported each other. We turned our back on Ukraine in an embarrassing way. We have lost all credibility, and every misstep has been obvious and avoidable. The Trump administration has mishandled all of the straightforward issues, and they will likely struggle with the more challenging matters ahead because of their lack of competence. Story 38. We are in a difficult situation. Unless we act quickly to reverse our course, we risk facing a crisis similar to the 1930s. We are already partway there. I am skeptical about the latest employment figures. The rest of the world seems to be uniting to respond to America's actions, targeting our economy directly. This strategy is effective. To quote Eddie Murphy from Trading Places, It occurs to me the best way to hurt rich people is to turn them into poor people. Story 39. Congress as a whole needs to take back its constitutionally expressed power to impose tariffs. I believe the founding fathers were wiser than our leaders today, and they entrusted that power to the legislature. It should never be subjected to the whim of one individual. Story 40. I believe the Smoot-Hawley tariffs were more carefully planned and strategically targeted. Therefore, I do not expect these to turn out as well as those did. Story 41. Simple illustration of consumer impact. My daughter owns a restaurant in Chicago. She just bought a 5-pound jar of peeled garlic cloves, farmed and packaged in China. Last week, the price was $25. This week, it is $99. We consumers will pay tariffs. Story 42. This individual will finally realize how foolish his actions are based on the widespread backlash. He will unwind them under the pretense that he has negotiated agreements with other countries and has succeeded. By restoring trade tariffs back to zero or close to it, he is likely to accept a secret gift or reward for himself and his family. One person should not have the power to single-handedly negotiate the trading impact of nations. Your executive orders have undermined your own democracy. Story 43. Honestly, it might be worse than the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, but just for us. The Great Depression followed World War I, and many other countries were already in trouble. The United States was much better off than most, but those tariffs pushed everyone over. This time around, all the other countries are doing well economically, and China is the de facto manufacturing powerhouse instead of us. Everyone else has plenty of ability to work around the United States this time, so the United States is going to be the one falling. Story 44. Consider that these tariffs might not actually have much to do with other countries. What he is doing is strangling American businesses, which will now have to come to him pleading for tariff relief, much like he is already doing with universities that have diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. What payback will he demand in exchange for this relief? Story 45. I believe that unless the Democrats take an unwise action, they are likely to perform well in the midterm elections. It's the economy. Story 46. If applied for the remainder of his time in office, it could be permanently damaging to the United States, as supply chains would migrate away, leading to a severe recession that could destroy industries. If the Republican Congress can take decisive action to overturn the tariffs and reset them with a 2/3 vote, the impact would be less damaging. Story 47. If he keeps things as they are, which his previous behavior suggests he will not, it could end up very badly. I assume that once things begin to trend too far in that direction, he will reverse course, because if too many people's retirement accounts start to disappear, then the country will turn against him. If there is one thing Donald Trump has shown us about himself, it is that he needs to be praised. He cannot handle it if everyone dislikes him. Story 48. Tariffs are suitable for industrialized and manufacturing-based economies with a strong central government that provides safety nets, high taxes on the wealthy, a shift of talent from the private to the public sector, strong unions for the working class, and significant investments in infrastructure and innovation. We are facing tariffs with a service-based economy that heavily relies on providing import and export services to and from other countries. There is a weak manufacturing sector with only about 10% of the necessary infrastructure for trade wars, the privatization of goods and services that have been affordably available through the government, a separation of powers heavily favoring the executive branch, and the loss of thousands of jobs. This will likely harm aggregate demand. Story 49. Worse, as at the time communication was word of mouth, now it is one-to-one. He has made his bed and must lie in it. Story 50. The surprising part for me is that users on the conservative subreddit are praising these tariffs, arguing that it is all part of Trump's master plan to compel countries to negotiate. Meanwhile, countries around the globe are cutting ties. Story 51. Nobody has seen such a significant failure since the Great Depression. My only hope is that he will take advice from more knowledgeable individuals and put an end to this madness. People around the world will suffer due to a misguided leader. Those who voted for this are also to blame. Story 52. His flawed chart of tariffs is based on trade balances, not tariffs applied against us. It makes no economic sense and has nothing to do with the tariffs of other nations. He is trying to avoid settling current account balances with other countries. Story 53. I personally believe his idea that countries are robbing the United States is a smokescreen. I also believe they do not care about American jobs. I think this is entirely about controlling United States companies through coercion. Watch him introduce individual tariff exemptions if businesses demonstrate their loyalty through contributions. If businesses do not show loyalty, they risk losses and potential closure due to an engineered recession. Story 54. Work for 45 years, save for the kids, retire and see it evaporate. Watch the kids' jobs and money go away. Hope to die before facing catastrophic medical bills. But owning the libs is priceless. Story 55. What do you think about Trump's tariffs? They are bad for the world and detrimental for the United States. Will the tariffs be as harmful as the Smoot-Hawley Act, which is blamed for deepening the Great Depression? No, but the tariffs will exacerbate the other damage Trump is causing. The purpose of Trump's tariffs is to gain influence in business. He will start setting exceptions for those businesses that comply with his rule outside of the law, including mandatory bribes. Story 56. This just made it clear that if I have any hope for a good future, it involves needing to leave this country. I know commenters will tell me to stay and fight back, but why should I? We've been dealing with him for over 8 years, yet after all he has done, a majority of Americans either do not care enough to vote against him or still support him. Why should I stay and fight for these individuals when nothing has caused them to change so far? I say enough. I am not going to sacrifice my future for these people. I will fight while I am still here, but the moment I see a chance, I am out. Story 57. The guy has a tariff against Antarctica. We are being governed by a person holding a loaded shotgun. Story 58. I am enjoying watching the Republican Party self-destruct, as well as the base receiving what it voted for. I will take pleasure in watching his supporters suffer. The show has not even started yet. Story 59. I think Homer Simpson could come up with better economic policy. This is so foolish it must be intentionally poor. Story 60. They are significantly less intelligent than the Smoot-Hawley Act. They represent the most misguided economic decision ever made. Story 61. The damage is done. America has alienated its allies and now will have almost no say in world affairs. Canada, its biggest trading partner, has already made moves to sell oil to China and will likely establish some economic partnership with the European Union by September. Japan, once its closest ally, has sold off U.S. bonds. Other countries are also taking similar actions. Inflation in the United States is expected to skyrocket, severely impacting the poorest citizens. By the summer, protests will divide the nation. The United States may never regain its status as a trusted friend and ally. Story 62. Donald Trump's primary goal is to permanently weaken the United States. Whether this is viewed positively or negatively depends on one's perspective on his motivations. Story 63. Trump will blame everyone else for his significant mistake. The fact that anyone knowledgeable about economics and history, as well as those who saw Ferris Bueller's Day Off, repeatedly warned that this would be a disaster will not be acknowledged. Mark my words. Trump will claim that the only way to turn around the economic crisis, which is certainly not his fault, will be through tax cuts. Story 64. Canada is making new trade deals with non-United States countries. New contracts and new supply chains are being established. We are not going backward by trusting the United States again. No more integration for mutual benefit. It is too dangerous for us. Story 65. Global trade is a business that relies on people being, at the very least, reliable and ideally trustworthy. Trump has made America unreliable and untrustworthy. The only people who take such risks are those who obtain massive insurance policies to account for the unpredictability. If the insurance has to pay out, they will increase the rates until it becomes unaffordable. I would be seeking new trade deals with literally anyone but America. Story 66. Far worse. What Trump has not processed is the reality of globalization in nearly every sector. For decades, the economies of the world have grown in interdependencies. COVID showed this reality with, for example, Ford unable to complete a pickup truck build because several small components were unavailable from countries that were at different stages of returning to work. And this wasn't just chips, none of which came from the high-end fabrication plants they are funding in the CHIPS Act. This seems to be a serious blind spot for Trump. No surprise. His history is in real estate, a relatively simple business where projects have very low interdependencies. It's about capital, site, and contractors. A day at the beach. Don't get me wrong. There was absolutely a need to deal with some countries specifically. If a country is dumping, monopolizing, or involved in intellectual property theft and industrial espionage, then mitigation is necessary. However, if a country has a minor tariff on U.S. competitors to protect a very fragile business sector that employs many people at fair market rates, then that necessity must be respected. The U.S. has done the same for companies like Harley-Davidson. If a country blockades your imports while freely shipping their exports that compete with those same imports, you have every right to say this needs to even out. Let's say we cap your exports at the level of the imports you allow. But we all know the U.S. is not squeaky clean here. No one is. Story 67. Seriously, another one of these posts? From an account that's 9 days old, posting a softball ragebait question that's going to fly to the top of AskReddit. But, nope, nothing weird about that. Story 68. I do not believe we are heading toward a depression, but we are certainly approaching a recession as the economy has failed to achieve growth for 2 consecutive quarters. The market is highly volatile, political leadership has become disillusioned and misaligned, unemployment is rising, consumer financial confidence is low, cash on hand for the middle class is strained, the cost of goods remains high, and disposable income is disappearing. Many share the blame, including half the population, for becoming narrow-minded and voting selfishly instead of considering the greater good of the country. Additionally, a political opposition has been distracted and forced an unpopular non-elected leader to be their figurehead, resulting in significant backlash. We are far from progress, as we may be stuck for another 4 years with a disastrous start to the second campaign of the former president. It will require the majority of the current supporters to realize they may have made a mistake for any change to occur, as the existing Democratic leadership appears weak. Story 69. Yes, there is no doubt about it. Congress could actually do their jobs and stop this desecration. They voted for the president to invoke tariffs without a vote from them. They can certainly vote to rescind their initial vote and begin to hold this administration responsible for the damage it has done. Story 70. It will definitely be as bad or worse. There is a way to make tariffs work for your country without damaging relationships with other countries. This is not the way at all. This way is built on 2 ideas. 1. The United States is in a superior position compared to the rest of the world, to the point of being completely indispensable. The only people that matter are the wealthy elites, and everyone else is dispensable. The first idea is based on a belief in America as a country and a power. However, this is not the case. Only those with a distorted viewpoint believe that the former president holds this view. The second idea is completely accurate, and everyone except his supporters is aware of this. Story 71. If he sticks with them, their effect will result in something at least as bad as the stagflation of the late 1970s and early 1980s, and possibly as bad as the Great Depression. The things that may save us are: 1. He has the attention span of a gnat on meth, so he might move on to something else. 2. The Republican Party loses the House of Representatives, and Congress pressures him into dropping them. 3. The ruling class decides that a poor economy does not benefit them as much as they thought it would and forces him to reverse course. Story 72. Our economy is more sensitive to global disruptions than it was during the 1930s. These tariffs are much higher than those seen during the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. The situation will be worse. Story 73. They will significantly impact the stock market and the global economy. Fortunately, I started moving to cash when I noticed Warren doing the same. I'm prepared for the lowest point, if it ever occurs, so I can reinvest and gain profits. Maybe. Story 74. It's all an act to consolidate more wealth into fewer hands. The next step is what matters, and that could be 10 years away. If the Democrats regain control, significant reform is needed. Story 75. Yes, They have the earmarks of the Hawley-Smoot tariff. When asked how to destroy the American economy, the AI replied with 6 points currently being executed by the Trump administration. There are no interpretations that justify this. That makes sense. Story 76. First, the formula for calculating tariffs is simplistic and imposes high tariffs on goods from some of the poorest countries on Earth that have virtually zero trade with the United States. In contrast, for larger countries with significant trade with the United States, the calculation is not reciprocal and is often badly skewed. The person who devised these numbers was incompetent. Furthermore, other countries will no longer view the United States as a reliable trade partner because the current administration is not operating intelligently or consistently. Over time, they will bypass the United States for trade and investment, with many turning to China for collaboration, undermining the retirement investments of millions of Americans, while crippling the government's ability to respond to their needs will undoubtedly anger voters in 2026 more than anything seen in many decades. Focusing on reviving outdated industries while defunding investments in infrastructure, semiconductors, artificial intelligence, and other new technologies will not restore the United States to its former glory and will further degrade the quality of life, alienating voters even more. It may be easy to criticize, but I believe the current tariffs mark the beginning of Trump's undoing. With no competent leadership in the cabinet or key government roles to counter his erratic decisions, I foresee a trajectory toward resignation or impeachment and conviction within 2 years. Story 77. A significant difference was that during the 1930s, Congress passed the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act with a large bipartisan majority. Today, these are often referred to as the Trump tariffs. There is not much anyone can do at the moment, but there is not a substantial coalition of support. Story 78. Someone could run on removing all tariffs and probably secure the nomination. Vote for me, and you'll actually save money. Story 79. It depends on how long the cult continues to follow him. If his support collapses, we can course correct, even if we have to get him out of the way. The loyal base is the only thing holding most politicians in line. If enough of his supporters abandon him, the Republicans will finally pull their heads out and start doing the right thing. But if the cult doubles down and believes his madness, he has another year and 3 quarters to do even more damage. People are forgetting that this is still just the beginning of the Mad King's rule. Story 80. It is disappointing. I have lost $30,000 from investments already due to tariffs and the decline in stock prices. Story 81. I believe America is now the second most isolated country, following North Korea. It makes sense as he has admitted to being a dictator. Story 82. It all depends on how long the tariffs remain in effect. This realistically means how much damage former President Trump is willing to inflict on the U.S. economy, and since narcissists are notoriously lacking in empathy, it will likely be considerable. Story 83. Tariffs will raise prices and hurt Americans and American companies. The bigger issue is that foreign markets will turn their backs on the United States as a trade partner and forge new alliances driven by anti-American consumer sentiment and procurement practices. This will severely impact many American manufacturers. Buckle up. The situation is chaotic, and the challenges are just beginning. Story 84. Free trade consists simply of allowing people to buy and sell as they wish. It is protection that requires force, as it involves preventing people from doing what they want to do. Protective tariffs are as much applications of force as are blockades, and their objective is the same: to prevent trade. The difference between the two is that blockades are a means by which nations seek to stop their enemies from trading, while protective tariffs are a means by which nations attempt to restrict their own people from trading. What protection teaches us is to do to ourselves in times of peace what enemies seek to do to us in times of war. Story 85. My biggest issue is that it is not targeted towards specific goods that the United States can actually produce or should produce based on an economic plan. Instead, it encompasses all goods, even those that the United States cannot produce. Therefore, it is not incentivizing United States industry as much as it is incentivizing industry without the United States. It is a plan created without consideration for the nuances of reality. Story 86. We have transitioned from the strongest economy we have ever had to rapidly entering a recession in a matter of weeks. This is just the beginning. Thank you to the voters who supported this outcome. Story 87. They are going to be devastating. There is a reason we have not done anything this unwise as a country for 90 years. Story 88. They are detrimental to everyone, but the extent of the damage depends on the duration and the vulnerability of each individual country to exports and imports with the United States. If this is merely an initial move in negotiations with the goal of quickly reducing tariffs, the long-term damage will be minor, as countries can wait it out. However, if the tariffs become more permanent or if genuine negotiations do not occur soon, the damage will be severe and long-lasting, as countries will likely attempt to limit their exposure to unpredictable actions from the United States that disrupt their economies. There will also be enduring negative sentiment towards the United States, given that there were non-disruptive options to negotiate trade or simply implement targeted tariffs to protect strategic industries. The approach of causing widespread disruption without a valid reason is not a sound business strategy. Story 89. The Republican plan is to bring the American people to their knees, creating one wealthy class in slavery for everyone else. Story 90. Here is how we determine if Trump is truly compromised by Russia. If these tariffs cause significant economic damage and he devises a plan that worsens the situation, we will have our answer. Story 91. Like everything related to Trump, he is likely to significantly impact the situation, then declare victory and reverse decisions. Unfortunately, the damage will have been done, but his supporters will accept his narrative. Story 92. Even Ben Stein, who is a Republican, released an updated tribute to his Ferris Bueller classroom scene, discussing the negative impact of tariffs. Story 93. Yes and no. I wasn't around for the Great Depression, so I don't know how bad it really was. However, I do think that Trump has damaged America's standing in the world order, and other countries are going to rally against America. New trade agreements and new military pacts are emerging. America will no longer be the police of the world, but rather a nuisance that other countries do not want. Story 94. Are Trump's tariffs effective when Russia is exempt from them? The strings are being pulled in Moscow, not Washington. Story 95. They are misguided, and anyone who tries to present information that tariffs are not important is spreading misinformation. Story 96. It depends on what you mean by bad. Tariffs benefit the wealthy elite. The top 1% become even more affluent while the rest of us struggle. That's exactly what Donald Trump wants, and that's why he misrepresents his economic plan at every opportunity. Story 97. Donald Trump's attempt to transform our economy into one resembling North Korea's will ultimately result in an economy similar to North Korea's. Story 98. Imposing tariffs on uninhabited islands is a prime example of the thought and effort invested in the process. The individual in question has no idea. Story 99. I am a customs broker. This situation is worse than I imagined. I expect 10 to 20% inflation within the next few months and a significant economic slowdown. This is unless Congress acts to counter it. The authority used is challenged in court and injunctions are put in place, or the administration hesitates after seeing reactions and reverses this Liberation Day move. Story 100. He is uninformed. We were aware of that. However, his supporters are troubling because some of them know better and are not putting a stop to it. The Republican Party Senate, Supreme Court, Mike Johnson, and others. Story 101. He will appear in a month, inform us about the tariffs how strong they made the economy, and then repeal them. Story 102. Since this is essentially a tax on consumers, you can expect consumption to decrease, leading to higher prices and businesses cutting work hours. This results in less take-home pay and inflation, which then leads back to reduced consumption. Additionally, there will be retaliatory tariffs which will decrease exports, leading to reduced hours and wages for workers in export industries. This decreasing pay will further contribute to the cycle of reduced consumption. Story 103. The United States will cease being the leader of the world, and instead, that role will be taken by China and other negative influences. Thank you, Trump voters. You share responsibility for this situation. Story 104. No, they will be closer to the Plaza Accord of the 1980s. The dollar will devalue enough to bring offshore labor back to the United States. This, in turn, will raise wages over time as jobs are returned and competition resumes. However, there will be short-term effects observed by consumers who purchase inexpensive imports. The United States economy is large enough to withstand this challenge. Story 105. It was well established that the Smoot-Hawley Act tariffs were applied when American production was already in a strong position and didn't need any protection. Our economy was doing quite well prior to Inauguration Day, so the administration's tariffs are in response to uncertainty. If our trading partners apply reciprocal tariffs or replace us with other partners, we will have to rely on what we produce, which is insufficient to sustain our own population. Story 106. Despite being a larger economy, the United States cannot impose a global tariff alone, as it may not be able to handle the entire world by itself. Story 107. The United States collectively picked a fight with the world only a few years after a pandemic and a small recession. People do not want to be dragged down by a tantrum and will begin to walk away entirely. We have no tolerance for nonsense, and no one is coming to help. American exceptionalism was already a joke. Hopefully, it will be used to combat the trend of anti-intellectualism. It is okay to be wrong, but it is your responsibility to learn from mistakes, not to double down. Story 108. Not necessarily. Globalization has benefited corporations, institutional investors, banks, and the wealthy. They initiated it with promises of high-value service jobs to replace manufacturing. Globalization has coincided with the largest transfer of wealth from the bottom and middle to the top in history. The trade-off for the bottom and middle has been cheap throwaway consumerism, no job security, and a poorer quality of life. Of course, the markets do not like what is happening. Apple was paying $10 for each iPhone produced in China. Now it's $14. This will either affect their profitability or dampen sales if they pass on the costs. Walmart's prices are going to be more expensive and people will buy less. The tariffs are reversing 30 years of globalization that have hollowed out the economy for the benefit of a few. The risk is that it is too much too quickly, but the idea to return manufacturing and value-adding goods domestically is the right one. The commentators who label China as a threat are often the same ones who built up the Chinese economy at the expense of the United States. I believe this adjustment will be less inflationary and more likely to dampen activity as consumers and retailers adapt. I work in furniture, and I know retailers who are scrambling to find U.S. manufacturers to take on their production to avoid the tariffs. Commerce is organic. People and businesses adjust. Story 109. This will be far worse. Trump has alienated our best friends, the ones who have and would again send their young men and women to die by our soldiers' sides should we ask them. He has done everything he can to destroy these generational friendships and has already destroyed what was factually the best economy in the world in less than 4 months. He has broken the rule of law and is now breaking laws daily, the most horrific being his deportations and arrests without trial or due process. This is just a pretext until it's regular citizens who are treated the same, with the caveat that they are all considered terrorists. Trump, who is known to be a marginal student, is dictating what universities can and cannot teach. He has appointed the most incompetent group of sycophants that could be found, all because they bend a knee to him over our nation's laws and its constitution. We are a people who choose not to believe we could be taken over by an authoritarian. But believe me, if you have ever read about how it has been done in other parts of the world, it's already too late here. He is now a dictator, and there's nobody to stop him anymore. This is the end of America. What it will become is up for debate, but it will not be great. Not again, not ever. Story 110. Tariffs can be changed. The larger issue is that we have made permanent rivals out of what used to be allies. We have taught the world that the United States is one election away from being completely unreliable and unworthy of close friendship status. That cannot be undone, and businesses tend to avoid unstable partners. Story 111. Tariffs have never been a winning strategy. Even the McKinley tariffs, which inspired Trump, were so unpopular that the Republicans saw their House majority cut in half during the 1890 midterms. These tariffs will not last past 2026. Story 112. Back in the day when the Smoot-Hawley Act contributed to the stock market crash, there were not as many safety nets as today, causing the stock markets to completely bottom out. The Great Depression occurred due to a lack of regulation and a system that could not protect itself from total collapse. It won't be pretty, but it won't be as bad as 1929. What will be worse is the rest of the world undermining United States exports, possibly for good, despite a lack of Donald Trump sooner rather than later. What Trump, Elon Musk, and the individuals in the Republican Party complicit in this have done is destroy supply chains and reputations. We will likely try to rebuild our trade relationships with the rest of the world once Trump is out of the picture. But it's going to be a hard-fought battle because trust in the United States is essentially gone. Nobody can be assured that this won't happen again because the United States is trapped in a two-party system that can and will keep the average citizen down unless something changes once the Republican Party loses its majority in the federal government. And it will happen. It's just a matter of when. The biggest challenge the United States will face is a reckoning beyond anything we've experienced before. Not even September 11th will compare if we actually confront this issue and acknowledge what has transpired. We essentially allowed a dangerous movement to reappear within the United States, and we did not take it seriously until it was far too late. Now we are left to confront this reality, and it's not looking good. It is up to us right now to either fight back or accept our fates as the next Russia because it is either not going to happen or it will. Momentum for these hands-off protests needs to increase in size and speed to ensure this never happens again. I have faith that the United States will rise from these ashes, but it depends on how well we can recover after addressing this problem. Story 113. What does Reddit think about Trump? You know the answer to this question. Reddit doesn't like Trump and thinks everything he does is bad. This subreddit is flooded with posts about him, and every post is similar. Story 114. This will be worse. Herbert Hoover was an honest man and a mediocre president who was mistaken about economic policy. Donald Trump is a notably corrupt person and a poor president who is severely misguided about economic policy. Story 115. I believe this will continue to cause problems worldwide, but the United States was once a manufacturing superpower and was more essential in that regard. Now, the United States primarily has a service-based economy, so other countries will likely cope while the United States experiences significant challenges. Story 116. Worse, we live in a global economy and we cannot isolate ourselves. The problem is that other team members have their own resources and can continue without us. This isolationist mentality has never worked. We need smart, capable, informed, and intelligent individuals in government. We must restore respect for expertise across all fields, from farmers, carpenters, auto workers, and food workers to technicians, doctors, lawyers, scientists, and yes, government employees who are knowledgeable. Disrespecting people based on their work ultimately backfires. Story 117. Working in manufacturing, these tariffs could rival the Smoot-Hawley tariff. In the 1920s, we did not rely on international supply chains for certain elements and materials. Now we do. There are no alternative suppliers in the United States to support this, as they were all moved overseas in the 1980s and 1990s. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.